In a shocking display of brutality, Hugh Despenser faced executioners who methodically dismantled not just his body, but also the very identity he had forged as a man. This was no mere execution. It was a calculated performance of revenge, humiliation, and political theater that startled even a society accustomed to public cruelty. Despenser had ascended from minor nobility to become the most powerful figure in England, second only to King Edward II himself. For over a decade, his influence instilled fear in earls and prompted queens to plot subterfuge in the shadows. However, when Queen Isabella finally struck back, she ensured that Despenser's demise would match the cruelty he had wielded against others. The method by which he met his end was not merely for efficiency, but expressly designed to inflict maximum suffering and symbolic destruction. Medieval chroniclers, typically reserved in their depictions of violence, recounted Despenser's execution with unusual detail and barely concealed glee, recognizing that they were witnesses to the violent conclusion of one of England's most turbulent political chapters. The sheer brutality of his death speaks volumes about the fear and hatred he inspired during his lifetime. What transforms a minor lord into a shadow ruler of the kingdom? And what reign of terror justifies such an elaborate and sadistic execution? The story of Hugh Despenser is one of unchecked ambition, royal favoritism, and the inevitable consequences of absolute power. His rise was meteoric, his influence absolute, and his fall catastrophic. Today, we delve into the darkest corners of medieval England to reveal the twisted tale of a king's favorite who flew too close to the sun. Hugh Despenser the Younger was born around 1286 into a world where loyalty to the crown could elevate a family to unimaginable heights or obliterate them entirely. His father, Hugh Despenser the Elder, had already established the family's reputation as skilled courtiers and ruthless politicians. The younger Hugh inherited not only his father's name but also his cunning and an insatiable appetite for power. The England of Hugh's youth was a kingdom in transition. Edward I, the formidable conqueror of the Scots, had died in 1307, leaving the throne to his son Edward II, a stark contrast to his warrior father. More inclined towards rustic pursuits and the company of male favorites than the responsibilities of ruling the realm, Edward II's weak leadership created fertile ground for ambitious men like Hugh Despenser to flourish. Edward II's reign began shrouded in scandal, primarily due to his infamous relationship with Piers Gaveston, a Gascon knight who became the king's closest companion and rumored lover. Gaveston's arrogance and the obvious favoritism displayed by the king enraged the English nobility, who felt their own influence diminish in the presence of this perceived foreign upstart. The baron's fury ultimately led to Gaveston's execution in 1312, but this only left a vacuum that Hugh Despenser was perfectly positioned to fill. Unlike Gaveston, who was perceived as an outsider, Hugh Despenser was undeniably part of English nobility. He possessed political instincts that Gaveston lacked, understanding that true power did not lie solely in flaunting royal favoritism but in systematically consolidating an insurmountable position within the existing power structure. Where Gaveston was content with titles and wealth, Despenser sought something far more dangerous: actual control over the machinery of government. By 1318, he had maneuvered himself into the king's inner circle, becoming Edward II's new favorite, and many suspected his lover. Yet Despenser brought a level of political sophistication and ruthlessness to this relationship that overshadowed Gaveston's influence. He aspired not merely to be the king's companion, but to be his voice, his right hand, and eventually his replacement in all but name. The transformation of Hugh Despenser from courtier to shadow ruler began with his appointment to critical positions within Edward II's administration. By 1322, he held the title of Chamberlain, which granted him direct access to the king at all hours and control over who else could reach the monarch. This position became the cornerstone of his power, allowing him to filter information, influence decisions, and gradually isolate Edward from other advisors. Despenser's methods were as methodical as they were ruthless. He identified potential threats among the nobility and systematically neutralized them through a combination of legal manipulation, economic pressure, and, when necessary, outright violence. Lords who opposed him faced confiscation of their lands on trumped-up charges, imprisonment of family members, and the stripping away of their traditional rights through creative interpretations of feudal law. The Welsh Marsh became Despenser's particular obsession and the primary source of his growing wealth. These border regions, traditionally governed by semi-autonomous lords, brimmed with land and resources. Despenser adeptly leveraged his influence with the king to engineer conflicts with the Marcher lords, then swooped in to claim their territory, their defeat or exile. Within a few years, he had amassed a personal domain rivaling royal holdings. What made Despenser particularly dangerous was his understanding of bureaucracy and law. Unlike previous royal favorites who relied solely on the king's protection, Despenser cultivated a network of legal justifications for his actions. He packed courts with his supporters, manipulated parliamentary proceedings, and meticulously constructed a paper trail that gave his land grabs and political persecutions the veneer of legitimacy. This systematic approach meant that his victims often found themselves legally powerless to resist. By 1324, Hugh Despenser had effectively become the ruler of England in all but name. Edward II, increasingly dependent on his favorites' counsel and affection, rarely made significant decisions without him. Foreign ambassadors reported that audiences with the king were meaningless unless Despenser was present, and that real negotiations transpired in private meetings with the favorite. The traditional nobility found themselves sidelined, transformed into spectators in their own kingdom. Despenser's reign was marked by a campaign of terror against anyone who dared oppose him. His enemies did not merely face political marginalization, they faced total annihilation. The Earl of Lancaster, one of England's most formidable nobles and a cousin to the king, was executed in 1322 after challenging Despenser's might. This execution sent a clear signal: not even a noble's blood could shield them from the wrath of the king's favorite. Despenser's persecution extended beyond simple elimination. It was characterized by deliberate humiliation and suffering. Opponents weren't merely killed or exiled. They were stripped of their dignity through public trials laden with fabricated charges. They were forced to witness their families imprisoned or impoverished, subjected to punishments designed to break spirits before rendering bodies lifeless. The psychological torture often proved more effective than physical violence alone. Hugh Despenser cultivated a network of informants and supporters that penetrated every echelons of English society. Servants in noble households, clerks in government offices, and even clergy members found themselves either recruited or coerced into serving Despenser's intelligence apparatus. This created a culture of paranoia where no conversation was safe and no alliance secure. The age-old bonds of feudal loyalty began to dissolve amid the pressure exerted by Despenser's ever-watchful surveillance state. Women were not exempt from Despenser's cruelty. In many instances, they suffered disproportionately. The wives and daughters of his adversaries were used as leverage, imprisoned under harsh conditions, or forced into marriages that served his political ambitions. Lady Alice de Clare, one of the wealthiest heiresses in England, was essentially kidnapped and compelled to live under Despenser's control so he could manage her vast estates. Such violations of the chivalric codes that govern noble behavior further fueled the growing outrage against his rule. When Bishop Adam Ollerton of Hereford dared to criticize royal policy, Despenser had him arrested and tortured, shocking contemporary observers and adding accusations of impiety to the already growing list of charges against him. The breaking point came with Queen Isabella, wife of Edward II, daughter of the King of France, and one of the most powerful women in Europe. Increasingly marginalized and humiliated by Despenser's dominance over her husband, the favorite made no secret of his disdain for the queen, blocking her access to Edward while systematically reducing her household and income. But Isabella was not a woman who would accept dismissal quietly. In 1325, Isabella was dispatched to France to negotiate with her brother, King Charles IV, over disputed territories. This diplomatic mission offered her the perfect opportunity to escape Despenser's control and begin organizing resistance to his regime. Once in France, she started gathering support from English exiles and disillusioned nobles who had fled the persecution inflicted by Despenser. Her cause gained traction when she established an alliance with Roger Mortimer, one of the Marcher lords who had successfully evaded Despenser's earlier purges. Isabella's propaganda campaign against Despenser was masterful in its simplicity and impact. She depicted herself as the wronged queen, driven from her kingdom by the unnatural influence of her husband's favorite. She highlighted Despenser's violations of traditional laws and customs, his attacks on the church, and his systematic destruction of noble families. Most effectively, she positioned him as a corrupt foreign element infiltrating English values, despite his English origins. The Queen's message resonated powerfully across Europe, evoking memories of the dangers royal favorites posed and the chaos they engendered. Isabella presented herself as the defender of legitimate governance against tyranny, and her cause attracted the support of nobles, merchants, and common people who had suffered under Despenser's rule. By 1326, she had assembled an invasion force ready to return to England. The invasion itself was almost anticlimactic. Upon landing in Essex in September 1326, Isabella was greeted as a liberator rather than resisted as an invader. The weary populace, exhausted by years of Despenser's oppression, flocked to her banner. More significantly, the nobility, previously cowed into submission by fear of the favorite, seized their chance for revenge and abandoned Edward II en masse. As the king and the Despensers fled westward into Wales, hoping to find sanctuary in regions where Hugh's power had once reigned supreme, support vanished. Local leaders quickly realized that their future lay with the Queen rather than with the discredited king and his favorite. The network of fear and patronage that had sustained Despenser's power proved built on quicksand when faced with real resistance. Hugh Despenser the Elder was captured first, seized by Isabella's forces while attempting to defend Bristol Castle. His execution was swift yet brutal. He was hanged, drawn, and quartered as a traitor, with his head displayed on London Bridge to serve as a warning to others. But this was merely the prelude to what awaited his son. Hugh Despenser the Younger was captured near Llantresant in Wales on November 16, 1326. Contemporary accounts depict him as already broken by the collapse of his world. The man who had terrorized England for over a decade had been reduced to a trembling figure, having allegedly attempted suicide rather than face capture. His captors, however, had no intention of granting him an easy escape from justice. Although the decision regarding Despenser's fate was never in doubt, the method of his execution required careful planning. Queen Isabella and her supporters recognized that this execution needed to fulfill multiple purposes. It had to satisfy the demand for vengeance among Despenser's many victims, serve as a deterrent to future royal favorites, and symbolically cleanse the kingdom of his corruption. The execution they designed was a masterclass in medieval political theater. On November 24, 1326, Hugh Despenser was brought to Hereford for what would be his final performance. The choice of location held great significance. Hereford was in the Welsh Marsh, where his power had thrived, and it was the seat of Bishop Adam Orlerton, whom Despenser had tortured. The crowd that gathered was enormous, drawn not only by morbid curiosity, but also by a genuine desire to witness the fall of their oppressor. Despenser was not granted the courtesy of a trial, though his crimes were publicly recounted for the assembled crowd to hear. The litany was extensive: treason against the crown, theft of royal lands, persecution of nobles, assaults on the church, and the corruption of the king's affections. Each charge elicited roars of approval from the crowd, who had awaited this moment of justice for years. The executioners were meticulously instructed in their duties, approaching their work with the precision of seasoned craftsmen. This was no ordinary beheading or hanging. It was a demonstration of what befell those daring enough to corrupt the natural order of the kingdom. Every aspect of the punishment was laden with symbolic meaning, and every incision was calculated to maximize suffering while keeping him conscious. Despenser was first stripped naked and paraded through the streets of Hereford, allowing the crowd to witness the physical reality of the man who had terrorized them for so long. The once mighty favorite had been reduced to trembling flesh, becoming an object of mockery and disdain. Verses deriding his relationship with the king filled the air as spectators hurled refuse at his defenseless body. The actual execution commenced with Dispenser being dragged through the streets tied to a horse, his body battered against stones and debris. This preliminary torture served to weaken him physically while providing entertainment to the crowd. By the time he reached the scaffold, he was already bloodied and barely conscious, but the main event awaited. The execution of Hugh Dispenser was designed as a systematic annihilation of his identity as a man and a symbol of the tyranny that had plagued England.